So, first of all, welcome to tonight's Night with the Stars. A great title. It's so good to see so many enthusiasts of astrology. I think of us as really as mystic masses, you know, out of the cave, onto the street, and into what we might call spiritual hubs like these in urban society. Isn't that amazing? Right? Mystic masses. The age of wisdom has really come about. Who are we? What are we? Why are we? These are questions that have been baffling our ancestors, and they continue to baffle us today. Am I the only one who's baffled by that question? I hope that everybody is in the same boat. And also our lineage, the lineage that you sprout from, and whom you right now sitting in these chairs, myself included, represent. Isn't that exciting also? And who you present a possibility and an opportunity for liberation. You are at the forefront of that lineage, as passed down through the father and the mother figure. And you present an opportunity for them, for that lineage, your ancestors, my ancestors, an opportunity for self-discovery and liberation. So that's what we can know about ourselves right now. This is who we are. In modern garb, yes, scarves and modern shoes, modern life, with all of its troubles and tribulations, excitations, inspirations, all of the things that you and I, all of us together individually and as a group, face in our daily lives, right? We take these for granted, and by that I mean we don't really spend nearly enough time probably to explore them at any depth. At least that question, that existential question of who am I, you know, what am I? Beyond the body, beyond the form, beyond my name, beyond my sex, beyond my nationality, even beyond my persuasions. What is it that I am? And what can I expect to know about myself? Who are you? We don't know who we are, but who are you?
I'm sorry.
Who are you?
Oh, I was so lost. That's why I was like walking like this.
We're lost too.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I apologize.
So,
I was the last one, right?
no, there's a few coming, but come and sit there.
All right.
Yeah. So, this is not a small thing. It can be very the only word that comes to me is beguiling, you know, to look at ourselves and to see ourselves in this modern form, in our modern life, to presume that that's really all who we are and all that we represent. But we don't represent ourselves only in this way as this introduction is hoping to do. That we really represent a lineage through the father and the mother at least. But the tree extends much, much, much further back to time and space that we can't really know very much with any degree of accuracy. So we do, however, in this moment, right now, present an opportunity. Not just for yourself, not just for myself, but also for our lineage. And it's an opportunity of freedom and liberation. Because probably, and we can't know with any certainty, there's never really been a time, I'm supposing that, when the need for self-knowledge was as great. Would you agree? The conversation is on the street, isn't it? It seems that everybody you sit next to is either talking about yoga or meditation or their star sign or something of that nature. Is that true for you also? And this is why I say out of the cave onto the street and into these spiritual hubs, urban centers, offices, homes, kitchens and schools. I taught meditation for 4 years in a high school. Amazing. So, know thyself, the bottom line. I remember when I first came across these two words, I think I was about 17 or 18. They didn't seem to me to be an invitation into self-knowledge. It wasn't like, you know, it's a good idea for you to know yourself. It was more like a command. Know yourself if you know what's good for you. These two words that were written on the proverbial doors of Delphi in ancient Greece. Know thyself. When I saw these two words, I really felt quite strongly that this was a command. There was a demand here, and it would be, if I was wise, the most important thing that I could do. And today, I can see that that's really the wisest sort of impression that I ever made, because it did dictate and guide the journey that I've been on. And so my interest in astrology, which is our topic tonight, all about astrology, and before I tell you what the intent of this night is specifically, I'll just tell you a little bit about that. That's when my interest in astrology really also began. It was as a form of self-knowledge, as a tool for self-knowledge. It wasn't necessarily wanting to know what was going to happen, fortune-telling, all that sort of stuff, which may be interesting, but I was really interested in knowing what made me tick, what motivated me. I was quite confused. I'm not saying that I'm not still confused. I'm still very confused. But I wanted to know what was going on, what made me tick, what motivated my persuasions, my likes and dislikes. And I also wanted to enhance myself in some way in the hope of getting a piece of the pie that everybody else seemed to be getting. So I wanted to enhance myself. I wanted to know more about myself. I think this is what motivates most of our journey into this field of self-discovery, is that we want to enhance who we are in the world to some level. And there's no other conversation in my mind, or there's no other topic in my mind than astrology that gains as much on one table, approval and disapproval. Am I right? You're either for astrology or you're against it, right? And those who are for astrology, they can't really explain why. It's just, I don't know why, it's fun. And it was certainly true for me. It was a lot of fun. I found that I could spend hours, days, months that turned into years just looking at these things on the circle, the symbols that seem to communicate so much to me. And then on the other side, you have these people who refute astrology on the grounds of reason and logic and rationale and science. But we don't care about that, right? Although, I mean, science itself really has its antiquity, we might say, has its roots in this most ancient of the sciences, astrology, that gave birth to astronomy. But that's not what we're here for. We're here to have fun with this tool of astrology, with this tool of self-knowledge. So the division is not our interest, but our interest for being here really is to be able one day, at the end of this hour and a half, 2 hours, 3 hours that we have together, to be able to take a look at this and to know what you're looking at. It's right now, it may seem like a small mystery. Does anybody feel that way when they look at this right now? This is what am I actually looking at? So at the end of this, my hope for you is that you'll be able to take a look at this and know what the fundamental components of this chart, what it is first of all, what it represents, and what it is made up of. What are these scribbles on it? What are these symbols on it? And so on. So very simply, there's not going to be any science, there's not going to be any calculations. It's going to be more like a street talk astrology. I want to be sharing with you the story of astrology in a way that often when I've shared it with others, sitting at a dinner table or whatever, I said, but why don't people tell me this is what it is? Well, I don't know, but that's what it is. So in such a way that it inspires us to look at astrology with demystified eyes. Does that sound like it might be interesting for everyone? Yeah. So, first of all, let's have a look at let's have a look at show of hands of the Aries in the room.
Aries.
So one Aries. What about Taurus? There is one Taurus from what I saw, so she's probably not here yet. What about Gemini? There's about 3 or 4. Okay. And what about Cancer? There's a few of us. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And what about Virgo? Okay, 1 Virgo. And now we have quite a few Librans. Yes. And no Scorpios. From Libra to Scorpio, we didn't quite arrive there. What about Sagittarians? Okay. And what about Capricorn? And Aquarius? Okay. And Pisces, finally, we've got a few.
And Leo.
We have a Leo. You Leo?
Yeah.
So now what I would like you to do is take a look at your chart and see where Leo is positioned. And this is where you do not like to be ignored or missed. So Leo looks like this lion's head scribbled up the top, this red symbol here. So this is if Scorpio is the area where we do not like to be noticed, or we would like to remain private. Leo in your chart, even if you are not a Leo, is where you do want to be noticed, where you do not want to be missed. Now that was either done on purpose or it was an opportunity that we take. So astrology, it's all about astrology tonight. What is astrology? Apart from this work, I'm also a rebirther, which means that I work with people and helping them heal to their birth trauma that occurs at the time of their birth. So it seems that I'm fascinated with this moment that time of birth represents. Because if there is one thing that all of us have in common, apart from the fact that this moment finds us here, hopefully a little bit more aware than we were a moment ago, we also have a moment in which we arrived into this body where a piece of life entered through the gateway into this realm and took up its vehicle, its form. We all have that in common. Nobody can take that away from me. You agree? The fact of my birth. Nobody can take that away from you. This is one thing that we have in common. And that's really good news. That we have one thing in common. And that one thing points towards the mystery of not only our arrival here, but the mystery of our origin. A piece of life incarnates here for a reason we may not know, but which we try to describe with the mind. We have, with the use of the mind, such things as reason and purpose. But if for a moment we would take away this idea of mind, if you could not actually think and make abstractions, would there still be such a thing as purpose and reason? If you could not think, would there be such a thing? What might we find? So when I started to interest myself in astrology, very quickly it became apparent to me that there were patterns, clear patterns. That my birth produced an output, if you like, of a pattern, a geometric pattern, let's call it that, which symbolically can be represented in this natal chart. This is what we call a natal chart. It means that it's an astrological chart which represents your time of birth, what the planets were doing and what they looked like in the sky at the time that you arrived here. Right? That you arrived here from that point of mystery in order to take up your form, your vehicle. A piece of life incarnates into this body. With the mind, we can know certain things about it, but beyond that, we would have to go beyond the mind in order to get a sense of. So when I started to look into astrology, I became aware of these patterns, but also quickly understood that this was really clearly describing the known, but it could not tell me anything about the unknown. So what the hell are we doing here? Well, what we're doing here is that the fact is that we know very little about the known, about ourselves. For so long now, we have been promoting the unknown. God, spirit, the soul, through books, through literature, through the wise ones, etc., that continue to tell us, you are not the body, you are this and you are that. And that may be true for them. And so we tend to start with the unknown. And we lead ourselves into these areas of obscurity where we really don't know what's going on anymore. So, whilst astrology cannot necessarily tell us very much about the unknowable and the unknown, the mystery of self, it can tell us a lot about the known, which for me is really the gateway into the unknown. In my experience, it's only when I began to really look at myself, when I said, throw away everything that you think you know, and let's have a look at what you do know. And I began with my body. I said, well, I know this, I'm here. Can you dispute this? No. Is this something that you share with others? I hope so. What else do you know about this? I have a history. Can you dispute this? No. Is that something you share with others? Yes. I know that I had a childhood. Can you dispute this? Can you doubt it? Can you argue it? No. Is that something you share with others? Yes. I really don't like to be lonely. We're together in this. What else do you know about yourself, the fact of your birth? Can you dispute this? No. Is that something that you can share with others? Yes. 9 months in the belly? Yes. Sperm and an egg? Yes. Father and mother? Yes. Desire and aversion? Yes. And now we move into the mystery. You see how I began for me with the known. I didn't start with the unknown as I had been told throughout my history, throughout my childhood, that I should start. Start with spirit, start with soul, start with God. I don't know anything about these. I really don't. I cannot tell you anything about them with any great degree of certainty. I cannot. But what I can tell you is that I am here. I can see this, and through tracing my history back, I can arrive at the mystery and the sense of wonder of this great cosmos that we inhabit. So here we arrive at a second point. This map that we're holding here tells us about the moment that we arrived, that this piece of life incarnated into this form took up this vehicle. It also tells us about the relationships, first, between this piece of life and the vehicle. Between this piece of life and this vehicle and its form. Now, is that interesting at all? The relationship? Did you even consider, perhaps you did, perhaps you didn't, that there may be a relationship between this piece of life, we don't know what it is, really, because knowing involves the mind, and the mind cannot know this piece of life. It can point to it, but cannot know it as such. So this relationship between this piece of life, we're using words to describe it, and this form, this body, there is a relationship. And this relationship can either be harmonic or harmonious, or it can be discordant, conflicting, or misaligned. And as a way of understanding this, and we will go into this in a moment, by the way, but I want to begin this astrological discussion by setting certain foundations, essential. Because astrology deals with the story of this piece of life that incarnates into this body for a particular reason or purpose, as the mind describes. So the relationship between this piece of life and this body, it can be harmonious or it can be conflicted. Now, what happens if it's harmonious? Let's assume it's harmonious. What can we expect in our living? Harmony, probably.
Happiness.
Happiness. What else can we expect?
Peace.
Could we say acceptance? Could we say meaning, perhaps? That there is a reason behind things and that I don't need to know them right now? Could we say a sense of certainty, security? Could we say perhaps even joy? That everything is okay, everything is as it should be. But what happens is if there's conflict, the opposite would be true. Now, awareness can lead us to harmony. The opposite of awareness is what we might call ignorance, where we're kept in the dark about ourselves, and that could lead us to probably the opposite of harmony. Probably what a lot of us might experience regularly, particularly in such challenging times in the environment. So now it brings us to the second quality of relationship that I want to talk about before we start to look at the layers of astrology of your natal chart. The environment that you and I inhabit, these urban realities. There's the home, yes, but there's also the bigger environment, which is maybe your city, your community, but also just, let's call it the planetary community today, because we are so connected with one another. Could you see that too? Yeah. We know everything about everything today. Everybody's sticking their nose in everybody else's business. At least I am. So we're dealing with relationships when we talk about astrology, and this is why I'm telling you this in this manner. The second relationship that astrology deals with is the environment that you and I inhabit. Right? The relationship between me and my form, yes, but also the relationship between my unity, my body, my form, and my piece of life, and the environment that I am required to live out my life. Right? You enter into this space when you come in. This becomes your environment that you're required to navigate and manage yourself. And what is the self? This intrinsic link, this relationship between the piece of life and your body. So the relationship between your piece of life and your body, and the relationship between this unity has with the bigger environment, the world, the political arena, the social arena, the world that you inhabit. But astrology also deals with a third, more abstract relationship. At least it does for me. And it is the relationship between this unity also, not only with the environment, but in the opposite direction with the cosmos, the invisible, the unseen. Because whilst my body belongs to this world, whilst my body belongs to nature, that piece of life does not belong to nature. Don't ask me where it belongs to. I came from there, but I don't know. You came from there, but with this I cannot tell you. But without this, in the journey of meditation, it's possible to discern this life whence we come from. I can't say anything about it. I doubt anyone can. But we can all sense it every day, every moment. When we tune inward, we begin to develop the capacity of sensing that life. So we are also talking about, we are also talking about the relationship with the unseen. That you and I stand as, for the lack of a more accurate word, is a bridge between the known and the unknown. That's what you are. And when I say that's what you are as that piece of life in this form your unity, that's the first relating. And in this environment that you are also living your life. Pollen came in with you.
I have to make it appearance, you know. Italians.
Are you a Leo? Are you also a Leo?
No, I'm Pisces.
Pisces.
But I have a strong ascendant.
Oh yeah.
I don't know what it is.
It's in there in front of you.
I am Sagittarius now. I'm a Sagittarius.
That's it.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
What happened if he, I sent to you my wrong time I was born?
Yeah.
It's,
It's okay.
yeah.
We're not going into details
Okay,
today.
I just want to check because I was kind of like, oh, I don't know if this is stuff.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Otherwise, it is very important.
Yeah.
So far, all we've said really is that we are dealing with relationships. A piece of life incarnates into this body at a particular moment in time. And if you were an energy or a symbolic photographer and you could take a photograph of the sky, the planets and the positioning of the planets is what you have in your hand. I'm going to describe the layers of this in a moment so that you understand what this means. But first, let's get this really clear, that when we are talking about astrology, we're talking about relationships between the individual self and the universal. Yeah? That you and I represent. And the environment, the relationship that we're having with this environment. Now, so it's a two-way relationship. It's a relationship that extends outwardly and creatively in the environment, and that extends inwardly towards the abstract, towards the unseen in an evolutionary sense. So these two relationships that we have to manage. And that this becomes possible for us if there is harmony between the piece of life that comes from there and this living form which belongs to nature. Do you see? Are you following me? Mm-hmm. So it is possible for me, in other words, to become a bridge between the unseen, the great cosmos, the life that comes alive. This life that is alive now through me. I represent as the midpoint between the invisible, the unknowable, and the known. Now, if there is no harmony between this piece of life and the body, I have an internal experience of conflict. And if I have an inner experience of conflict, am I safe in saying that that's going to translate outwardly as discord, trouble, unhappiness, confusion? Would that be safe to say that? Yes. Now, I'm not saying that if there is inner harmony, these challenges in life are going to disappear. They certainly have not for me. But what is going to happen is a sense of acceptance and a joy. Everything begins to seem as if it's a glass half full, not half empty. Challenge becomes an opportunity for growth and development, whatever that means, growth and development, because also that only applies to the form. So, having said that, are there any questions about this? Is this, I'm trying not to be, well, it's not possible not to be too abstract of this conversation, but is this more or less clear? Yeah, everybody feels, are you following me so far? Okay, everybody clear? Okay. So this piece of life that we don't know much about, let's put it that way, that when I started studying astrology, I knew that I could not know too much about it, but I could know something about that moment that I was born and this body, the tendencies, the characteristics, the compulsions, all of those things about this body. And that first moment of my birth and that first experience of my birth, which is imprinted here, has a lot to say about my impression. Is that someone there?
Yeah.
No. About the impression this new life made in this body. That's very exciting. And there is a great clue in this moment. And this moment is here. This is what the sky looked like at the time of my birth. Not my Mariana's birth. And I could take a look at it, assuming I could study this alphabet of astrology. If it could just be described to me, demystified, I might be able to understand this vehicle and understand also something about that life that came into this vehicle and towards what end, because it's all there. So first of all, what are we looking at here? Well, what's the first thing that we see when we look at your chart? It's a circle. You can see that, right? And then what's the next thing that you can see about this circle?
12 signs.
Sorry?
12 signs.
12 signs. It's divided into 12 signs. Yes. What else can we see about this circle, inside the circle?
A lot of lines.
There's a lot of lines. What are those lines? We're going to discuss also. What else do you see inside the circle?
Planets.
Symbols that are planets. Very right. Yes. Anything else that you can see about this?
Houses.
The houses, the 12 divisions. So these the 4 layers. So first we're going to take a look at the first layer. We're going to be treating this chart like a painter. Have you seen a painter? Does anybody paint here? Right. So first you get the canvas, and then you maybe put a primary color, and then you a second color and third color and so on and so on. So layer by layer. And this is what we have here. Multifaceted or various layers compounded one on top of the other. So if we remove all of this inside, gut it out, we would be left with this just empty circle. So what is this circle? What does it represent? First of all, in terms of these relationships that we discussed earlier, we talked about the first relationship, the second relationship, and the third relationship with the cosmos. Do you remember that? Yeah. This third relationship, this cosmos, is really the background, the backdrop that we are required to live our lives. Would that be right? We live within this great big circle, we might say. The planet is a circle, cosmos and universe and the 7 universes and whatever it is out there. This circle represents this out there. And the inside stuff, this lines and these symbols, represents essentially who we are. Playing out our life inside this backdrop. So the circle is the cosmos, the universe.
The big circle, this like this outline.
Just the circle, yeah, like the outside, the whole circle, yeah. And then the stuff, the symbols, and that's the self. That's the positioning of the planets and the qualities and the energies. So the circle, first layer is you draw out the circle. The next thing you do, in order to bring this circle into understanding, you divide that circle into 360 degrees. You see on the very outer perimeter of the circle, there are all these little lines. Mm-hmm. There's 360 of these lines. Why 360 degrees, a circle? Because there's 360 days, essentially, in a year, more or less. So the circle is broken into 360 degrees. Has everybody got that? Right, that's the first thing. The second thing that we do with this circle, we notice that it's divided into 12 numbers. Stay with me. Can you see the numbers? You can see that this circle is divided into 12 pies. So we've got the circle, that's the cosmos, and what we've gone to do with it, for the sake of understanding, we've gone and divided it into 12 pies, let's call it. But why have we done that? Because each of these pies represents a phase in the human experience, as well as a phase in the human development. So we've taken this circle, which is the cosmos. I mean, it's a huge thing, and this is where we live. And then we've gone and applied to it 12 human experiences. So when we look at these 12 human experiences, you see there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. You can see that, right? But what do these mean? So, okay, we've taken this abstract circle, let's call it, the God circle, and we want to understand it with our minds, individual, personalized minds, and we've applied to it 12 human experiences. But what do they mean? Okay, so let's have a look now. Have a look at your own chart as I describe this 12 areas. So you see the first house? We call these 12 houses. So these phases, what? So these phases of human experience, they're very real to you. You're going to suddenly realize they're part of your life. And they are also 12 phases of human development, which you may not be aware of. But let's have a look at these experiences. The first one, what is it? It's the house of self. The most essential part of myself. It is me. The first house is myself, the spirit of myself, the seed of myself. Okay, so we might say in mundane astrology, we might say this is the house of the ego. Okay? Then the second house, we move from the first house, we move to the second house. The second house is the house of my security or values. So the first house is the house of myself, the seed of myself, the essence of myself, the spirit of myself. The second house is the house of my values, my security. We might also call it my soil. It is the most material aspect of myself. If the first house is the house of spirit or the most spiritual aspect of myself, by spiritual I mean that which does not contain any material form yet. It is pure spirit. It is pure idea. The second house, well, you've got the seed. If you've got a seed, you need what?
Grow.
You need soil. You need soil. It needs to grow. The growth, the necessity. Who said that, by the way? Grow.
Me.
Who?
Leo.
Okay. So I'm looking beyond you.
Why?
So this necessity to grow is inherent inside the seed. It's part of the first house. So exactly. In the second house, we've got the soil. You've got the seed, you've got the soil. The soil needs to be what? Needs to be rich. This is why the second house represents the material. The second house is the most material part of myself. It lacks spirit, so to speak. So I've got the seed, and then the second house, I've got the soil. And the soil has got to be rich. My values, my security are there. Right? My finances. So I've got the seed, I've got the soil. Now the third house in your chart. And you'll notice that each one of you may or may not have something in these houses. Now, if there's nothing in that particular section, that does not mean you don't have anything in there, because on the outside of that circle, you'll see that there is a squibble. There is a sign, an astrological sign. So the second house is the soil, the third house. If you've got the seed and you've got the soil, what do you need now? Stay with me for a second. If we've got the soil and we've got the seed, what do we need now? What's going to bring them together? You need a gardener, right? And that's the third house. The third house is the house of the gardener. Mercury, Gemini. The first house is the house of Aries. The seed, pure spirit, fundamental ideas, without form, before they become animated and before they develop into form. And the second house is the house of the material, foundations. Taurus, exactly. And then the third house is the house of the gardener, Gemini, Mercury. Gemini rules the mind in terms of communications and connections. So the third house is the house of linking, that links pure spirit, idea, with the ground, with matter. And what does that in your experience? What translates from the unseen to the seen in your own body? The mind. Yes, the mind acts as this intermediary between the high and the low, so to speak, or between the abstract, the unseen, and the seen. Remember that relationship that we were talking about before? The mind is essentially the messenger of the unseen into the seen. So the mind, the third house, is all about our capacity to translate ideas into form. You see? Are you following me so far? All we've really said is that what you've got here is you've got this circle, which is really the cosmos, and then we're trying to understand this cosmos. How do we personalize it, make it part of our human experience? And then we're going, well, maybe if we divide it into 12 parts, what's important to us? What are the matters that matter to us all? Well, there's the self. Okay, let's make that the first house. The second house, you've got the first house, house of seeds. The second house, Taurus, you need soil. And this is the house of the soil, so you've got the seed and the soil. And the third house is the gardener, the mind that connects ideas or translates ideas into form, that links them together. Are you following me so far? So if you've got the seed, you've got the soil, now you've got the gardener. In the fourth house, ruled by Cancer, the moon, is when the new shoot comes out of the soil, right? So the fourth house is all about that moment when the first green comes out of the soil. It penetrates through the soil into life. This is why in esoteric astrology we are told that all souls are first born into the sign of Cancer, because this is the realm of mass consciousness. So from seed into soil, into the third house, the mind, the gardener that brings the seed into the soil, into the fourth house. That fourth house tells us about our family tradition, about our childhood. It tells us about our roots. And it can also tell us a lot about our lineage. How are we doing so far? Are we following each other, or are you following me? You let me know if anybody gets lost, because this is just, yeah, I won't ignore you anymore.
It's gonna bite you.
Yeah.
Huh? You're gonna throw something at me. So, from the fourth house, we go into now the house of Leo, the fifth house. The first shoot comes out, mass consciousness. It's the family tradition, right? There's no individuation yet, right? Can we agree? It's a family tradition. Then come into the fifth house now is when that which was seeded in the second house by the gardener of Gemini that was born in the 4th house, the 5th house begins the process of what Jung calls individuation. You know, distinguishing myself from my family tradition. So have a look at your 5th house. This is where you begin to distinguish yourself from your family. Are you following me so far? Please forgive me if I keep asking, but I need to make sure that we're all of us trekking together. Typical Cancer. We're all going, or no one is freaking going. You know? Not always, but. So in the 5th house is the house of creativity, ruled by the sun, the brightest star in the sky. It's the house of creativity. It's the house of romance. And it's also, contrary to what contemporary astrology tells us, it's also the house of our sexuality, sex, romance, which is typically, or you hear it ascribed to Scorpio, but it is not. It's different. That's something different. But romance, sex, as we know it today, because it's no longer just a procreative energy for us, it's not. So in the 5th house is where I distinguish myself. This is the party stage. This is where I go out and say, look at me. Here I am. I'm bigger than life. It's all about me. I'm not going to be picking on anyone, by the way, but or I'm not complimenting anyone. I'm just trying to describe the signs as I understand
but
them.
it's totally true. I totally agree with you.
So wherever you have in the 5th house, or wherever you have Leo, is also true for you. This is where you love to be seen, or you don't mind to be seen, or you have the capacity to be seen if you do not know it. So in the 5th house is where I get up on the table and start doing, tabletop dancing. But guess what follows? Who laughed? Why did you laugh? You know what's coming. Yeah. Because this is the area of the 6th house, which belongs to Virgo. This is the stage of the hangover, the health and purification. This is where we come home after the party. Who's Virgo? This is where we come home after the party and go, did I really do that? Oh my God, did I really say that? Did I really act like that? Did I really tabletop dance? This is Virgo. Why is that? You're going to understand in a moment. You need to understand why, if you want to understand why Virgo is like that, and any of the signs, you need to go to take a look at the sign before it, or the house before it, and what comes after it. Because, look, the 6th house, poor Virgo, it follows Leo, tabletop dancing. And what comes after the 6th house, above the horizon, which we're going to describe in a moment, is Libra. And Libra is all about relating judiciously, harmonic relationships, win-win, justice. So in Leo, it's all about me. In the 7th house, it cannot be all about me. It has to be all about us both together. Do you see? This is how we can start to really understand what the signs are all about. The 12 signs represents one possibility. It's one sign. It's one cosmic reality, which we break down into these 12 astrological delineations in order to try to understand that which cannot be understood. Do you see? We are personalizing the impersonal. We're making the universal something that we can chew on. We're reducing God into small bite-sized pieces. Yeah? Are you following me? Yeah. So in order to understand what, I say I am Cancer, but I can know why I'm the way I am, because I know Gemini precedes the phase of Cancer because it's a phase of development. Each of the signs, before we start discussing above the horizon, and I tell you what below the horizon represents, each of the signs is involved in a particular human experience. All Cancerians, let's say, on the planet are doing one specific thing. All Arians are exploring, experimenting, conducting the Aries experiment. All Sagittarians, all Virgos and so on. Do you see? So there are currently, we might say, 12 experiments that are being conducted by the one force or the one cosmic power. So I am one part of that, and each astrological sign represents one phase of that experiment or one phase of that development. So the Cancer development, the Leo development, the Virgo development, and so on and so forth. Yes? One experiment broken into 12 portions. Let's each one of us go and you do this, you do this, you do this, you do this. We're trying to understand the unseen, the unknowable, in ways that we can relate to one another. Now, we've discussed the journey of the seed up to the 6th house, and you notice that this circle is divided into 2 parts. The lower, that which is below the horizon, and that which is above the horizon. Yes? Mm-hmm. So what is this below the horizon? Well, so far we've seen that from the 1st house to the 6th house, it's all about me, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Have you noticed that?
Sorry, I missed Virgo.
6th house is the house of, thank you again, because I actually didn't describe it well. It's the house of purification. This is where I start to purify myself. This is why Virgos never quite feel good enough or pure enough or perfect enough. This is why Virgos are so concerned with the details. Virgos are the surgeons of the zodiac. This is why Virgo is also attributed, or what's ascribed to it is also health. And they say it's the surgeon. That's why they pay such attention to the details. They cannot afford to make a mistake because the memory of Leo is just so strong. And the pull of Libra, the next phase of harmony, justice, fairness, both of us must shine together. You know, it's calling. So they can't afford to, well, they can, but they just don't know how to because of the pull of these 2 energies. The memory of Leo and the future of Libra. Are you following this? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So wherever you've got Virgo, so your 6th house is the house of purification. This is when you are really hard on yourself. This is when you are really judgmental. You are unyielding. No, I can't accept that about me. But where you really need to be a little bit easier on yourself. So this is where all Virgos are undergoing the process of purification. In a moment, I'll talk also about the 2nd layer of the signs, but they're really related. Each of the signs has a house and has a planet. Like Aries, or the 1st house, it has 1st house, Aries, Mars. Taurus, the 2nd house, Venus. The 3rd house is Gemini, the mind, Gemini, and Mercury. The 4th house, Cancer, and the moon. The 5th house, the sun, and Leo. The 6th house, Virgo, and, can anyone guess? Mercury. Yes. So far we
again.
Yes. 2 signs. Well, all the signs really have 2 planets, but it's okay for now. We'll just move along with this. That it goes a little more in depth with astrology, the reasons. So we followed the journey of the seed. into the sixth house. The seed, the soil, the gardener, birth, mass consciousness, into my family. I'm not an individual. That happens in the fifth house. Leo, the sixth house is go, oh my God, the hangover stage, what did I do? I better begin to purify myself before I go above the horizon into the seventh house, Libra, also Venus, in order to form relationships with others, fair relationships, right? So far, under the horizon is all about me. So now I would like you to take a look at your chart and see how much action if you have under the horizon. So the very first thing, usually when you look at a chart, you look at it and go, wow, everything is happening up top. Or everything's happening down bottom. Or everything is all over the place, quite balanced. So have a look at your chart, and I'm going to just go start one by one. What, for you, what's happening? Is that above the horizon or under the horizon? Above. What about you?
Mixed.
Mixed. What about you? Mixed. So let's have a look at, let's listen to everyone just so that we can honor the, yeah?
Mostly below.
But mostly below. What about you, Adamo?
Mostly below, but mixed.
Mixed also. What about you?
Mixed.
Mixed.
Mostly above.
Mostly above. And the Leo is
Above.
above, of course, yes. Below, of course. Above,
A mixture.
mixture.
I have lots of above, but I still got quite a bit.
Okay.
Below, sorry. Lots of below.
Go on.
Above.
Above, yes. Above.
Above as well.
Okay. Mixed.
Below.
Below. Middle. Above. Yeah.
I have a above.
Above, yes.
Below.
Below.
Mixed.
Mix. Above. Below. Below. Right. So I'm asking you just so that you can, I want to make sure that we're getting all of this. So if you have it below, if you have generally below, then this has been a beginning process development. There has been an ending and you have just started and you, it's not exactly like that, but generally when we look, we say, well, a lot of the material is happening above the horizon, which means that this is someone who's moving towards a finishing an incarnation, or beginning an incarnation after having finished one.
Yeah.
You know, whatever. Can't pump with the left hand. So
So what's
the significance of that?
Yeah.
What impressions do you get from that? A lot of the planets are above the horizon. I'm finishing an incarnation. What impressions for you do you get from that? What was behind the question? I want to know because
I hope something's good.
right, exactly. So it is finishing an incarnation. Astrology doesn't deal with good and bad. It deals with certainties about that here there is, I am moving towards finishing an incarnation. All the planets above the horizon have gone through that huge journey and they're moving towards finishing. And all those under the horizon are just beginning their gestation in this life. So it's not good or bad. It's just simply that there are cycles. We're dealing with cycles, yeah. So, but they can be studied in order to tell us what is finishing or what is, which areas have undergone a certain maturation, degree of development, and what is developing. Yeah.
So when you're talking about incarnations, are we talking about past lives?
Yes. We're not necessarily talking about past lives, but we can include that. We're talking about a journey of a piece of life, which we might call soul. I don't typically like to talk about soul because it's just a word which is meaningless in our, to me, a soul is an outward expression of inner harmony. And an ego is an outward expression of inner conflict. So a soul is the most harmonious interaction or way of relating, energetic relating in myself. When everything is harmonic, then I am expressing soulfully. Music, he's got soul, harmony, movement. To me, that describes the soul more accurately for me personally. I'm not, you believe in whatever is true for you is fine. For me, I need this spirituality to be practical. I've got my North Node, which you'll understand what that means in a moment, in the 12th house, and Taurus is ruling the 12th house, which is very practical. Spirituality has to be applicable, actionable. If it's not, it's devotion. I'm a devotional person, but that's not enough for me. I need to apply it in my day-to-day. So we've discussed that which is below the horizon, that which is going from seed towards maturation and purification. The seed is purified in the 2nd house, in the 6th house. Now it is ready to go into the 7th house. What's the 7th house? Now, I like to think in astrology that there are not 12 signs, really there are just 6. And that there are not 12 houses, there are just 6. The 1st house and the 7th house are one. It's like one stick with 2 ends. At one end it's the 1st house, at the other end it's the 7th. So if the 1st house is about me, my egoic reality, myself, it's my most essential part of me. If that's the 1st house, all about me, the 7th house is the opposite of that, and it becomes all about the other. Yes. So this is the seed that started here, is now ready to engage in harmonious relationships with others. This is the area of relationships. This is typically the area where we ascribe to our partner. Yes, our husband or our wife or our girlfriend or our whatever. Well, there is nothing else. Oh yeah, our boyfriend. So in the 7th house, it's all about the soul, let's call it that for now, has reached a certain level of development. It's gone above the horizon, and above the horizon, it's all about the other.
Is that the relationship just be friends as well? Or not really?
Friends belongs to another area
Okay.
that we'll arrive at. Yeah. But 7th house is essentially about romantic, not romantic, but our husband, our wife, our partner. Romance is more the 5th house. Do you see the difference? The 5th house is about creativity. That's why sex is ascribed to the 5th house.
Okay.
It's a procreative aspect. But the 7th house is about where now I make a linkage with a partner, with another, one other, intimate other. My husband, my wife, my husband.
Dependency.
I'm sorry?
Dependency.
Dependency in what sense?
Because 1st house is usually independence, and if it's the opposite, I'm
Yes.
dependent on the other.
Okay, very good. Let's have a look at that. Why the dependence, do you think? Why is the 1st house, and this applies to you because you have a 7th house and you have a 1st house. So let's engage that. This is a very important question. But why dependence? Why is the 7th house dependent and the 1st house is not? There is one, this is a beautiful thing to understand. You'll see it brings it to life. So I am independent because I have the capacity to see the world through my own eyes. However, I am incapable of seeing the world through somebody else's eyes. Typically, Aries are not capable, or wherever we have Aries is where we are incapable of experiencing the world through somebody else's eyes. Take a look at where you have Aries in your chart. Wherever you have Aries in your chart is where you are incapable. In the beginning, by the way, that doesn't mean you cannot develop into a most remarkable. Have you ever? I mean, who's Aries here? Right. So Aries has a most incredible capacity for learning to see the world through Libra's eyes, and it becomes something so profoundly mature. A masterful Aries is rare and should definitely be aspired to. Wherever you have that is where you have the great capacity to be really holistic. So does someone want to, if you know where Aries is in your chart? So do you see, can you see there? Yep. Do you see it?
Which one is the right? Okay.
Yeah. It's sort of like a big V spread branching outward.
So what's happening if you have anything there?
Sorry?
If you don't have anything
If you don't have anything in the first house or in
Aries.
let's have a look. As I said earlier, that doesn't mean you don't have anything, because all the houses have rulerships,
Okay.
which means that they have those signs on the outside. But I'm saying, I'm just in order to engage you,
Yeah.
I'm saying have a look where you have the sign of Aries, because we're not discussing the signs
Okay.
yet. Yeah, but we will in a moment. Have you figured out where Aries is? Yeah. Yeah. So now let's have a look at the seventh house. If the first house, and please pay attention to this, because this will really help for you. If the first house is where you are, if Aries is where you're incapable of seeing what you call independence, I'll go the world on my own. The Aries are great pioneers. They will go and travel the world on their own, etc., etc. They don't have that need to, bring anybody along. But the seventh house is where I am incapable of seeing the world through my own eyes. Librans are in the beginning stages of their formation, are incapable of experiencing the world through their own eyes. So wherever you have Libra is where you are. I can see a couple of faces sort of contorting a bit. Wherever you have in the seventh, or wherever you have Libra, is essentially where you're incapable of seeing the world through your own eyes, and you need to teach yourself to become more independent in that area. We're not talking about the signs yet, we will in a moment. So essentially the seventh house is the house of relating to a partner, to a husband, to a wife. It's also much more than that, but this is street talk astrology. We're not going into the more fundamental about the houses. Are you with me? First house about me, seventh house is about you. Right. Now we go to the eighth house. If the second house is about my values, my resources, my money, my security, my soil. You see, soil values, you see why values are important? It's the soil, because it's these values. It's within these values that this maturation process is going to happen for my soul, or my means of becoming essentially harmonious in the world. So if the second house is about my values, my money, my security, the most material, fundamental part of myself, the eighth house is the opposite of that. It's my values, it's your values, your resources, your money. It's also about higher power. The eighth house is about higher power. If this is about the most material, the eighth house is about the most immaterial, the most insubstantial. And this is a very important house, the eighth house. I'll tell you why now. That which started in the first house, journey a long time to the sixth house of purifying before I go up into the seventh house, make relationships with my partner and so on. The soul here undergoes this sort of experience of where I go, there's got to be more to life than this. I have gone through this large journey. I purified myself. I know how to have a fair relationship with others. I'm a good husband. I'm a good wife. But there's got to be more to life than this. And this is when the soul enters inwardly and begins to think and enters into the eighth house. Ruled, if the eighth house is ruled by traditional astrology, is Mars, not Pluto. Mars rules Scorpio, not Pluto. Yes, I know. Contemporary astrology tries to ascribe Pluto to Scorpio. It is Mars. And there's a very good reason, which we don't have time to go into now, but I can happily explain or describe. Yes. Same as Aquarius is not Uranus, it's Saturn. Yes. But anyway, this is traditional, and there's a reason why this traditional allocation of the planets needs to return, because half of them are related to this, to the left side of the brain, so to speak, and the right side of the brain are the other half. And when we take out, anyway, we're going elsewhere into. So let's just stick with this. The eighth house is the cave. It is the sign of, this is the phase of initiation. The seed that started here, that was born in the fourth house, went through this purification phase, purifying itself before the seventh house. Now the soul says, it's got to be more to life than this, and enters into the cave of initiation. This is Scorpio. This is the eighth house. And all of us have Scorpio somewhere in our chart. We'll talk about that after. By the way, there's a break coming soon that we're going to have some nibbles. So, eighth house is when the soul is called to journey inward in order to learn the lesson of power. Scorpio is all about vulnerability, learning the lesson of vulnerability. In vulnerability, there is tremendous power. Right? So the eighth house is when the soul turns its back against the world and undergoes this tremendous inner conflict, where the egoic identity that was established and built on, enhanced through the coupling with another in the seventh house, now goes into the eighth house and goes down on its knees and surrenders to a higher power, a power greater than itself, looks up and says, I surrender. And the lesson of Scorpio, wherever I have Scorpio, is where I bow down on my knees and I become humble and all-powerful. This is the beginning phase of the disciple. The initiate enters into the cave in the eighth house. It's a most splendid, powerful house. Those who are called into that house are many today, and there's quite a few of us in this room. So in the seventh house, you might say this is a phase of, it's nice, the relating, it's a neutral ground before I go into the eighth house. And I go into the eighth house, the house of, mundane astrology says it is the house of finance, other people's resources, other people's money, other people's investments, and so on. But really the eighth house is the house where I go in to meet the deepest facets of myself. And this is why it's called the house of the occult, not sex. It's not ascribed to this. For me, astrology is traditional astrology. There is a very profound reason for why it worked. But now, because of the intensity of the Scorpio experience, and because of the means of escaping through the Scorpio experience, through sex and controlling of others, is being called the eighth house is the house of sex. It's not. It's not. Sex is procreative. It's the fifth house, creativity. So Leo gains another house, that's a traditional symbology for it. So the eighth house, are you following me so far? Is this interesting? Is this absorbing you? I hope so. I hope so. So this is the second layer that we're looking at. Eighth house is when the soul that was born, the seed, the idea of myself in the first, goes through this purification phases and development, links up with a partner, goes, this is all great, it's lovely, and fair, justice, diplomacy, That's why we see Librans becoming interested in the lives of others, justice and fair, because they're just about to go into a bigger picture. They go from my husband and my wife to society at large through the exploration of science. Librans are great scientists. And then they go into the 8th house. They put it all aside. It says, I'm still not happy. What's going on here? And surrender happens. Before the surrender happens in the 8th house, of course, Scorpio phase, before that surrender, there is the effort to control the experience, the human experience, the emotions, and that of others. Immature Scorpios can be terrible in that sense. But when they are mature, so wherever you have Scorpio is where you have the capacity to control others or to really bow down and allow something so fundamental and so beautiful to enter into your life. And that area in your chart is where you are beginning your process of initiation. So, the 8th house, okay, you know, let's assume the initiation was successful, that through disappointment, through hardship, and Scorpio, the soul was able to bow down on its knees and to surrender to something much greater than itself. Then it exits into the 9th house, the house of Sagittarius, the house of Jupiter. This great dynamic power. This is why you see Sagittarians are so dynamic, so potent, half man, half beast, so to speak. Nature, part full of. They're in the cave, they've just come out of that freaking cave and they're ready to, bigger than life, right? So wherever you have, sorry, did I just become animated there? Yeah. Sorry. Huh?
Amazing. Beautiful.
Thank you. So in the 9th house is dynamic. If the 3rd house is the house of the mind, if the 3rd house is the messenger, it's the mind, the immediate environment. The 3rd house is also brothers and sisters. The 9th house is the house of the, essentially what we might call the seeker of truth. This is the house of, but let's take a good look at this. This is a seeker of truth. It's the house of philosophy, the house of higher study. It's the higher mind. If Mercury is the lower mind, and by lower, we are not meaning lesser. No, Mercury is very important, does a very important job. Mercury is the only messenger or the only planet or god in the sky that was allowed to traverse into the high realms of Jupiter and Zeus and then go down all the way into the underground of Hades in Greek mythology. So he's the only one that was allowed to go and nobody can touch him. He was the swiftest of the gods. So we're saying that it's the lower mind in the sense that it has a different job than Jupiter. Mercury is the butterfly of the zodiac, like Gemini. It pollinates. It's not supposed to go in depth into situations. That's where we do that in the 9th house. We journey into foreign lands and go into in depth. It's the area where we focus our attention, our awareness. If Gemini might be likened to an octopus with many arms, in the 9th house is where we focus our attention. Sagittarius rules that. Jupiter, it unifies, it brings together, it solidifies. This is where we point towards, this is where we decide on what we're going to essentially do with our energy, our power. Are you following this?
Yeah.
And the 9th house is where we decide on what we're going to do with our power. Is when we expand our horizons, when we learn about others, ethnicity, travel to foreign lands, but also where we access the realm of Jupiter, the great teacher. Mercury teaches us about this realm, if you like, connects the higher to the lower, and Jupiter connects the lower with the higher. Are we okay with that? Yeah. And then so we focused, the arch, the what do you call that?
The arrow?
The arrow at the target. This is what we're going to do. And then we go into the 10th house. This is where the 10th house is where we begin the climb up the mountain. Now, the 10th house is the opposite of the 4th house. If the 4th house is the house of my family tradition, my home, then it's safe to say that the 10th house is about my public image, the world. The 10th house, this is the area that rules traditionally my career, my profession. This is the mountain in the world that I'm going to climb. But it is also not only the mountain, it's usually ascribed to, let's say, business, it's ascribed to the corporate world. But it's also the house of the monastery. The 10th house is where we have an opportunity to exit this world. So if the 4th house is esoteric astrology tells us is when all souls are born, in the 10th house, that soul that began in the 1st house as a seed, went through that process of purification, has an opportunity to exit in the 10th house. Do you see? So in the 10th house is when you're really, or Capricorn also, is when you're really drawn to make a decision, to decide between the material world or the spiritual world. But this is in more mystic astrology or more esoteric astrology, but certainly where we can feel that conflict. It's about also our public image in mundane astrology, how I am seen in the world. This is why you see Capricorns are very fastidious about their public image, how they are seen in the world. Wherever you have Capricorn is where you really care a lot about how people see you. That doesn't mean see me as bigger than life in a material fashion. It could be that you want to be seen as a very austere or spiritual or saintly type of person. Whatever, but you care about your image. So in the 10th house is where we fastidiously climb to the top of the mountain. This is when we climb to the top of the mountain, we arrive there, and then the 11th house is where we come down from the top of the mountain to join the community again. It's been a long journey. You've climbed to the top of the mountain. You've learned the lesson of power in the 8th house. You've gone through this initiation in the 9th house and the 10th house. You've become the disciple. The 10th house, you've completed the disciplehood. Your 11th house, you come down to join society as a disciple now. In the 11th house, which is opposite the 5th house. If the 5th house is about my kingdom, creativity, procreativity, let's say, a baby in the 5th house. The 11th house is the house of brotherhoods and sisterhood. Who called friends earlier? Yes. This is about brotherhood more than friendships. It's about brotherhoods and sisterhood. It's about the universality of love. If the 5th house is about my love, which it is, romance, it's my love, my kingdom, then the 11th house is about universal love. It's impersonal love. This is why Aquarians are typically
detached.
Yes, they're judged for being aloof and detached. Yes, because they have a great universal capacity for love, or they can love without personalizing that great dimension of love, which in Leo, it's all personal. And I'm going to tell you something about the signs in a moment and how you can work to unlock them. It's really beautiful. But so in the 11th house is when we come down to the top of the mountain. You've found out, you come down, you're carrying a tray of figs. You discover that you're a fig. Come down. This is when you share. I am a fig. If you want mandarins, they're over there. If you want pineapples, they're over there. But I'm a fig. I come sharing the fruits of my nature. And the 11th house is when we come to share of ourselves in the world. This is a very important house because of a particular cycle that I'll also tell you about in a moment. In the 11th house is when we are servants of the group, of the collective. So wherever you have Aquarius is when you are in service, when you ascribe new vision of what it could be like in the world. How are we doing so far? We're just about to move into the last sign and into a little break to eat. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Cool. So now the 12th sign. So we come sharing in the 10th house, the soul, the maturing soul has decided to remain in service. He says, well, I'm not going to leave. I will come back into Aquarius and I come into service. Aquarians, we'll talk about the sign itself in a moment. But in the 11th house, we come sharing service, group identity. We feel comfortable in working in groups. For example, I've got Aries in the 11th house, ruling the cusp of the 11th house of groups. I feel completely driven to work in groups, yet I don't like groups. I don't like groups at all. I'm a Cancer. I don't like socializing. But there it is. But Mars is in Aries, and I feel I don't know what anybody is feeling. That's why I have to always check. In the 11th house is where, Aries is where I cannot see the world through other people's eyes. I can't see me through your eyes. I don't know how to. I have to just go by my feeling and every now and then check with you. So that's the 11th house. And now in the 12th house, move into this most sort of strangest of the houses, 12th house, the opposite of the 6th house. 6th house, if I like to think of the 6th house, if there is 6 and 12th house, if it's a helicopter, 2 helicopters, one in this is trying to land in the 6th house, it's loaded and trying to land, and in the 12th house, it's trying to lift off, but it doesn't want to. Pisces. No, I don't want to take off. In the 12th house is when the drop of water basically merges into the oceanic reality of oneness. That's when the journey ends. If in the first house, it's straight out of the dawn of the unconscious. The first house, the seed, or not the seed, but the first light of day, fresh and in the 12th house is when, it's just going back, becoming nothing. It's when I merge into the oneness of life. So the 12th house is opposite the 6th house. It's also the house of transformation. And so many things have been ascribed to this house, hidden enemies and what have you, or hidden help and so on. But essentially, I like to think of it as the house of transformation. When I lose all sense of myself and I allow myself to overcome my fear and I rise into the sublime reality of the one whence I came from, the unconscious sort of thing. So how are we doing with that? Did we all get an interesting, you find now you understand what the houses are all about? They're really indicative of a particular journey. It's a journey of a soul that's going through this process of maturation. So what we're going to do now is take a little break, toilet and nibbles, and I didn't get a glass of wine. For some reason. Did we run out? Maybe. Yeah.
Some of the pies have different sizes, some of the
The reason for that is essentially there are many different types of house divisions. Some use exact 30-degree house divisions, and some allow the houses to be more mobile. The reason for that is too complex to really try to detail right now. But just think of it as some areas in life are more important than other areas, but the scope of them are bigger or smaller. So intuitively you will have some impression. You know, Taurus, your second house is really good. Maybe I have a moon to move in that area. Why? That will intuitively come. Does that make sense? Yeah. So